Elemental wells have gotten a good amount of mods added to their set since we first reviewed them. Last time I came to the conclusion that with such a limited suite of mods and limited potency, that they were really not worth your time. After an underwhelming debut, new additions, buffs, and with the nerf of Warmind cells, it's time to revisit these mods to see if they're worth your time. Let's look at all of the mods we've gotten since that video. Each element has gotten one generator and then 3 mods that either execute an effect when you pick up a well or do something to wells or other mods in general. Arc mods are, unsurprisingly, all based around melee. We have Overcharge Wellmaker, Well of Ions, Seeking Well, and Well of Striking. Wellmaker spawns 2 arc wells whenever you do a finisher on an enemy. That's actually an incredibly reliable and efficient way to spawn elemental wells compared to the rest of the mods. Not only that, but there is no subclass requirement, although most elemental well mods do require you to match the wells to your subclass or weapon element to have a big effect. Well of Ions causes your next melee to deal increased damage after picking up an arc well. This bonus will last for up to 10 seconds, and it is a 30% damage boost. Seeking Wells have your wells move along the ground towards nearby players, and Well of Striking gives you additional melee energy when you pick up a well, with multiples of this mod stacking. How much more energy? A little bit more. A little bit more than a normal well for one mod. Solar mods are based on, you guessed it, grenades, explosions, and healing. Explosive Wellmaker is your generator. Rapidly defeating combatants with explosive damage spawns a solar elemental well. I'm looking at you, Bottom Tree Dawn. Well of Life gives you increased health regeneration for a short time after picking up a solar well. What that actually means is that your health will constantly regenerate for the duration of the effect. Bountiful Wells, I'm just going to read this one out verbatim, elemental well mods that cause you to spawn elemental wells can now stack, spawning additional wells for each copy of the mod that you have equipped. We'll go over that one in a moment. And Well of Ordnance, similar to Well of Striking, extra energy for your grenade when you pick up a solar well. Void mods, not as exciting, very defensively minded. Reaping Wellmaker makes it so that when you activate your class ability, the next weapon final blow on a combatant spawns a Void Well. Well of Tenacity, picking up a Void Elemental Well, reduces the damage you take for a short time. Enduring Wells, the lifespan of your wells is increased, stacking with multiples of this mod. A well normally lasts 20 seconds. 1 stack of Enduring Wells increases this duration by 10 seconds. 2 stacks increases it by 20 seconds, blah blah blah, you get it. And Well of Utility, take a guess here, more class ability energy when picking up a Void Well. Finally, Stasis. Elemental Shards, one of the top mods out there. Stasis Shards count as Stasis Elemental Wells in PvE. Elemental Time Dilation, wells that give you time-limited benefits now stack, increasing the duration of the effect for each copy of the mod you have equipped. So Font of Might, Font of Wisdom, stuff like that. Supreme Wellmaker is where casting your super spawns 3 stasis wells near you in PvE, and Well of Restoration, like all of the ones before it, just gives you more energy for the ability on the longest cooldown. We've also gotten Elemental Charge, which gives you charged with light when you pick up a well, or 2 if you match the element with your subclass. Shield Crash Wellmaker, breaking a combatant shield with a matching weapon type, creates an elemental well. And Melee Wellmaker gives you a well on a powered melee kill. There is also the Season 15 exclusive mod Fire and Ice, where killing a champion spawns 2 solar and 2 stasis wells. Even if you aren't using a well build, I think this is a very good mod to have equipped, especially since it only costs 1. A major positive that I need to give to these mods is the fact that you don't need to have weapons matching your subclass element, probably because most of these effects are non-gun related effects. You're free to use whatever weapons you want. If you do want to run with some of the original mods, and there are some cases where you might want to do that, then you're still going to have to adhere to your weapon element matching your subclass element. One negative I need to give here, though, is the fact that these mods require you to match the element on your armor. With many people already having builds that they enjoy, to even test builds, people need to rearrange tons of armor within their pre-built sets, swap elements a ton, all that noise. I used to be pretty okay with mods having elements because there weren't really that many mods that you needed to deal with, but with so many needing specific elements for your armor, that can kind of make testing these builds a little obnoxious. Fortunately, there are plenty of options that don't require you to swap everything you have to one element, but if you want to use all of the elemental mods in a set, then you're going to need to do some armor respecking. Alright, enough talk. Time for more talking, but actually important stuff. What are the mods that are going to be worth your time? And are there any builds that are worth anything at all? Let's start with Arc. All of these mods actually mesh really well together. Overcharge Wellmaker is an insanely strong well generation tool. 2 arc wells for using a finisher, of which there is no cost, like certain Charged with Light mods sucking away your super meter. Granted, this effect does have a brief cooldown, much like all well making effects do, but regardless, it's still very strong. You can easily combine this with Well of Ions and Well of Striking to get bonus damage on your melee and get more energy back for said melee. You could throw on an additional Well of Striking mod if you want to have this just be very one-dimensional. What I'd also recommend is Elemental Charge. Overcharge Wellmaker and Elemental Charge means that you can get Charged with Light ×2 almost every time you kill an enemy with a finisher. You make 2 wells, you pick them up, you gain their effects, and you also get Charged with Light. You then can combine that with any other Charged with Light mod, since you could run those 3 arc mods, Overcharge, Ion, and Striking, and then Elemental Charge, and now an additional mod. High Energy Fire, Protective Light, Reactive Pulse to get an Overshield on a finisher, Lucent Blade, Heavy-Handed, Striking Light, the list goes on. You could obviously also just do Overcharge Wellmaker and Elemental Charge as your base, and then go from there, since Overcharge Wellmaker doesn't really demand that much. 1 arc armor piece, and Elemental Charge has no elemental requirements. Being able to get Charged with Light on demand is a very, very valuable ability to have. It's why I've been running Empowered Finisher a bit recently. Imagine just being able to have Protective Light non-stop, as an example. Now, could you just run Empowered Finisher, you do 2 finishers, and get the same effect for the cost of some super energy? Yeah, you could, but we're here to talk about Elemental Wells, and that's not nearly as fun, despite the fact that you're doing literally the same thing. I used this for some runs of Astral Alignment with Heavy-Handed and Lucent Blade, and I was just overloaded with power. The enemies in normal mode are just so pathetic that everything I did was the most extreme overkill, not to mention I had to be fighting for kills against my teammates. In 1320 Lost Sectors, I pretty much rolled over everything without too much hassle, but 1350s were definitely a bit tougher in that I wasn't really able to make the build work as well because everything is just so lethal. With this being such a melee-focused build, though, that was only natural. But do I feel like I could have been just as successful running a more passive loadout that focused on solid weapon usage as opposed to forcing this sort of a build? Yeah, I do. 1350 considerably more so due to the high damage output of the enemies. Arc mods, unfortunately, still relegated to lower tier content for the average player because it's still just not going to be smart to be in melee range of tough enemies, even with all the Protective Light in the world. Not to mention the variants in modifiers you'll be fighting against. I'm sure there are some very specific builds that will be able to make these mods work, but the point of this video is to give an overall look at the entire mod landscape. Elemental Charge and Overcharge Wellmaker is a pretty good base to start with though, and that combo will be able to work almost anywhere. Seeking wells are pretty convenient, much more convenient than I was anticipating. The range is about 20 meters. The problem is that sometimes the wells get caught on certain geometry or just kind of get stuck and they never actually make it to you, defeating the entire purpose. It's mostly reliable though. Solar-wise, I'm not as impressed. Explosive Wellmaker and Bottom Tree Dawn mesh really well together, but due to internal cooldowns on spawning wells, you could wipe out an entire enemy field with a single grenade, get 20 rapid explosive kills, and be left with one well because of the internal cooldown. Sunshot and Xeno will also get you wells, but are limited by the same internal cooldown. Grenade launchers, both special and heavy, and rockets will also get you wells, but you need multi-kills, 2 or more kills at the same time. They are also limited by this internal cooldown. Well of Life's healing is not really impressing me that much. It's probably not something that's going to save you in higher end content. I would much rather have something like Protective Light. What I really want to be taking a look at is Bountiful Wells, the ability to spawn more wells. Bountiful Wells makes it so your mods spawn additional wells, 1 extra well per mod, with Bountiful Wells itself also generating another well for you. So, for example, in this clip, 3 Explosive Well Makers and 1 Bountiful Well mod gets you 4 wells when you meet the condition of the Well Maker. Overcharge Well Maker is normally 2 wells, with Bountiful it's 3, and with another overcharge it's 4. This ain't bad. It makes the well generation experience much more fun because you're getting a lot more of the wells to spawn, and the ability energy from a pool of wells ain't too shabby. Ultimately, I think this mod could be worth it if your build focuses solely on ability energy and using as many abilities as possible. If your build is based on proccing well mods to activate certain effects, then it might not be as worth it because there aren't really any effects that get bonuses from picking up multiple wells at the same time. Nothing stopping you from running back and forth to pick up said wells, but they only have a 20-second duration, and let's be real, in most day-to-day regular content, you're not going to run back and forth for those wells. You're just going to scoop them all up at once. This is a very overall look at the mod. I'm not really getting into specifics with this one, as I'm sure the possibilities are endless, but it ultimately just depends on what's the objective of your build. Oh, right, also we have Well of Ordnance. Definitely meshes with Explosive Well Maker for Bottom Tree Dawn, or if you're still using Sunshot or Xeno, you get it. The Void mods are a bit on the tame side. Reaping Well Maker pales in comparison to Overcharge, but if you want a somewhat on-demand Void Well, this is what you gotta do. However, you can use any weapon to make said Void Well after a class ability use, which is pretty nice. You can get class ability cooldowns to be pretty short, especially on hunters. Now, one important thing with Reaping Wellmaker is that it felt like the internal cooldown of generating wells via this mod almost didn't exist, at least in the test that I ran. I was able to get charged with light non-stop and was able to keep up font mods as well. This is also where I would consider seeking wells. Non-hunters will take a bit more time to spawn wells, and that's where I would potentially consider Bountiful Wells. Important to note, though, that Bountiful Wells and Reaping Wellmaker only stack once. The most amount of wells you can make with Bountiful and Reaping is 2, no matter how many mods you have on. This is likely due to hunters being able to get really short dodge cooldowns. Tenacity is like an on-demand Protective Light, which in my opinion is one of the best defensive mods in the game. However, with the duration of this buff lasting a very brief 5 seconds, I don't think I'm really going to wear this. This should probably be brought up to like 10 seconds. Enduring wells have them staying around for an extra 10 seconds. While I'm sure there are some sort of plays you can make with this mod, off the top of my head, it's not really something that I'm that excited about at all. I'd much rather just have another mod that actually does something. I'm sure it could have some moments, but I personally would rather have almost anything else. Well of Utility, again, good synergy with Reaping Wellmaker. The highlight Stasis mod is obviously Elemental Shards. Being able to double dip your Stasis shards for melee energy and well energy and effects when combined with Agar Scepter means you won't be able to spend your ability energy fast enough. Even when not using Agar Scepter, just being able to have one thing do 2 things at the same time, it's really nice. Elemental Time Dilation works with Font of Might and Wisdom, technically Well of Ions, but I wouldn't use it with that, Well of Life, and Tenacity. Font of Might on its own got massively buffed in Season of the Lost, now a 10-second base duration up from 5 seconds, and now a 25% damage boost up from 10%. This buff now makes this mod what I would call good. It's good now. With 3 Font of Mights and a time dilation mod, you're now getting a 21-second damage boost. With 2 fonts, it's about 16 seconds. With 1 font and time dilation, it's 13 seconds. The implications of this are that with the right loadout, you could have a near permanent 25% damage boost on a weapon with a matching element if you're willing to invest into well generation. The easiest thing to do this with is Agar Scepter and Stasis, with elemental shards thrown right in there as well. You do time dilation, elemental shards, font of might, font of wisdom, and then, screw it, another font of might, and you're basically getting a very high uptime weapon damage bonus and super energy bonus on top of melee energy from the shards themselves. You don't even need Font of Might times 3, because if you're doing your job with Agar Scepter, you'll be freezing everything non-stop, collecting shards, and refreshing your buff. That's nuts. That's absolutely nuts that you can make a build that doesn't really require any extra input on your end for such a huge amount of bonuses. And you only need 2 armor pieces to be Stasis. The rest can be whatever you want. Now, once you start to move outside of that build specifically, that's when it gets a little tougher and you need to invest a bit more. Arc is definitely going to be the next step down, as Overcharged Wellmaker is the next easiest thing to use in order to make wells. Might times 3 or Might times 2 and a Wisdom mod, plus time dilation, and, there you go. It does require you to be hitting finishers quite frequently though, and you need to be on an Arc subclass and be using an Arc weapon. Still though, very high uptime, 25% damage boost, not too shabby. Supreme Wellmaker just doesn't really seem that great to me. 3 wells for using your super compared to 2 for a finisher via overcharge, or even just fire and ice for Season 15 specifically, killing a champion. I'm sure your teammates, will be very thankful, but if you're running any sort of a get a super very quickly build, like, I don't know, Agar Scepter on a Warlock with Mantle of Battle Harmony, then it's not the worst idea. Well of Restoration is for people who don't really have any sort of focus on a particular ability, but I don't think I would use it because I would want to focus my build on something specific, not just whatever ability happens to have the lowest energy at the time. Overall, the more I looked at Elemental Well mods, the more I realized I was just using them to generate Charged with Light so that I could use the effects of Charged with Light mods instead. Each element has a generator, then each one has some sort of utility effect, then each one has a bonus energy on a specific ability effect, and then each one has some sort of other actual effect. Arc is bonus melee damage on a punch, Solar is some slow healing over time, Void is a short defense buff, and Stasis is 3 orbs on a super. Each of the mods within their element mesh very well together, meaning you're probably not going to be mix and matching wells from other elements. I just kind of feel like the mods are spread really thin and just don't give you enough of a boost to really be able to compete with the power of Charged with Light mods. I'd much rather have a 5-second sword damage boost with Lucent Blade than a one-time 30% melee damage buff on one attack. I get that it costs more for Lucent Blade, it's 5 versus 2 for Well of Ions, but it's a price that I'm very willing to pay because the benefit is very big. Again, this video was just a very general overview of the mods, and I'm sure there are some builds out there that are pretty good, like Agar Scepter plus, Stasis Well mods, but other than that, I don't know if they're strong enough to justify really investing into. If you have a build that you like running, feel free to drop it in the comments. Please let me know, because I'm just one guy and there was no way I was going to be able to think of every single application that these mods could possibly have. I think some of the utility mods could be combined with the other mods, like longer duration wells. I don't know who's really using that. Combine that into another mod. I also get that these mods are cheaper compared to Charged with Light mods, and thus aren't going to give as big of an effect. They fit into gear a bit easier, but I'd still just rather get Charged with Light mods because their effects feel more impactful during gameplay. That, or I would rather just generate as many wells as possible to get a ton of ability energy. I don't think I'd really bother with the effects too much, as I don't think they're quite there just yet. Font of Wisdom, Font of Might are mods that I would actually consider throwing into my build because you can have pretty decent uptime on them, but you do need to do a little bit of elemental coordination, mainly with Font of Might. And, you know, let's not forget the shuffling of your armor elements that you might need to do to actually coordinate your mods in the first place, which can be very expensive. Whew. Yeah, I think that's how I'm feeling about Elemental Well mods right now. There's a couple more buffs. I think they'll be a little bit better. I don't know if they're there just yet. Maybe some of the element agnostic mods have a bit more usage, but yeah, I think we use a little bit more love here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.